Today's lesson is about solving trig equations. Let's look at some steps for solving trig equations. First of all, you have to decide the pattern of the equation so that you can change the whole equation into single trig equals constant form. Find out the reference angle and figure out the solutions between 0 to 2 pi. By using the following two diagrams. Then you will figure out the period. For sine and cosine, period equals 2 pi over b. For tangent, that's pi over b. Then you can figure out the general form for the solutions. Solve for x on the domain x to 0 to 2 pi. And write down the general form of the solutions. First of all, we know this is a cosine to the first power. That's a linear pattern. The keywords for linear pattern equation, that's isolating. Which means you will put all variable on one side, number the other side. So here's the equal sign. I will put all variable to the left side. When you cross this equal sign, remember change sign. So you will get the 7 cosine x minus 5 cosine x equals square root of 3. Combine like terms, I got 2 cosine x equals square root of 3. We need a single trig equals constant. Therefore, I divided by 2 both sides. I got the cosine x equals square root of 3 over 2. Reference angle, that's pi over 6. Because cosine pi over 6 equals square root of 3 over 2. We know that square root of 3 over 2, that's positive. According to this diagram, all students take calculus. We know the first quadrant and the fourth quadrant cosine is positive. We got the pi over 6 and then 11 pi over 6. Therefore, this x, check this angle, will be equal to pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. So we can get the solution x1 equals pi over 6 and x2 equals 11 pi over 6. These two solutions are between 0 to 2 pi. Then we need to figure out the general form of the solutions. Since for cosine 1x, that's b equals 1, so period equals 2 pi over 1 equals 2 pi. Therefore, general form will be pi over 6 plus 2 pi times n. 11 pi over 6 plus 2 pi times n. And n is integers. Now let's go to D. First of all, you have to isolate all variable on one side. So I move 3 tangent x on the left side and then 7 to the right side. 4 tangent x minus 3 tangent x equals -7 plus 6. Remember, cross the river, change sign. You can count equal sign as river. Therefore, combine like terms, we got the tangent x equals -1. We got the single trig equals constant number. After this, remember we're looking for reference angle. That's pi over 4. So use the diagram. For tangent x equals -1, this is a negative number, so less than 0. For tangent negative, let's go to second quadrant and fourth quadrant. The second quadrant, that's 3 pi over 4. This one will be 7 pi over 4. Let's go to this x, that equals this 2. So we write down x1 equals 3 pi over 4, x2 equals 7 pi over 4. General form, period, that equals pi over b, that's 1. So we got the pi. Since this is a tangent, period will be pi over b. Therefore, 3 pi over 4 plus pi times n. 7 pi over 4 plus pi times n. And n is integers. Let's go to f. First of all, we still know this is a linear pattern because sine to the first power. Isolating, that's the key words. So I need to isolate this sine function. Remember, angle x minus pi over 4 cannot be separated. You have to stay like this. Angle you cannot separate. We minus 1 both sides. That means we cross positive 1 to the right side. We change sign. Therefore, we got square root of 2 sine x minus pi over 4 equals -1. Then we divide it by square root of 2 both sides. You will get sine x minus pi over 4 equals negative square root of 2 over 2. After simplifying this part, we got the negative square root of 2 over 2. Since we already got the single trig equals a constant pattern, so we go to reference angle equals. That's pi over 4. Therefore, let's go to this diagram. For sine equals negative, this is less than 0. Sine negative, let's go to third and fourth quadrant. Since reference angle is pi over 4, therefore you got 5 pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. So here is an important part. The angle for sine is x minus pi over 4. This angle will be equal to 5 pi over 4 and also 7 pi over 4. So when you write down which angle equals 5 pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4, always check the angle for that trig function. Therefore, we got the x minus pi over 4 equals 5 pi over 4. And also we got the x minus pi over 4 equals 7 pi over 4. Then we solve for x. Cross equal sign, change sign. So we add pi over 4. X equals 6 pi over 4. Reduce, we got 3 pi over 2. For this part, I add 4 pi. I got the x equals 8 pi over 4. That's x equals 2 pi. I can write down x1, here's x2. Now let's working on the general form. We know the p equals 2 pi over b. The number beside the x, which means coefficient of x will be b. That's 1. equals 2 pi. Therefore, I can write down 3 pi over 2 plus 2 pi times n, or 2 pi plus 2 pi times n. N is integers. Let's go to H. First of all, we need to isolate sine function. Therefore, we divide it by 2, both sides. You will get the sine x plus pi over 3 equals 1 over 2. Reference angle, that's pi over 6. So we go to coordinate plane. For sine, that's positive, means go to first and then the second quadrant. So we got the pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6. As we know, this angle equals 5 pi over 6 and also pi over 6. Therefore, we will set up the equation as x plus pi over 3 equals 5 pi over 6. And x plus pi over 3 equals pi over 6. Since we're looking for x, we minus pi over 3. I need to working on the fraction. Denominator, one is 6, the other is 3. So I can multiply by 2, top and bottom, so that we can get denominator same is 6. 5 pi minus 2 pi, that's 3 pi. So we got pi over 2. For this side, minus pi over 3. So we got multiply by 2, multiply by 2. You will get negative pi over 6. That's x equals negative pi over 6. Since x equals negative pi over 6 is not between 0 to 2 pi, we need to add its period so that we can get from 0 to 2 pi. We know the period, that's 2 pi over b, that's 2 pi. So for negative pi over 6, I add 2 pi. Denominator multiply, that's 6. Cross multiply, that's a negative pi. This is a plus 12 pi. So you will get the 11 pi. Therefore, if we are looking for the angle between 0 to 2 pi, x1 equals pi over 2, and x2 equals 11 pi over 6. For the general form, we know period is 2 pi. Therefore, I can write down pi over 2 plus 2 pi times n, or 11 pi over 6 plus 2 pi times n. And n is integers. This will be the final answer. Let's go to part 2. Solving for x on the domain 0 to 2 pi. What's the pattern for this equation? Since we only have a tangent square or cosine square, we call this is a power pattern. Keyword still isolating. Remember that if you have x squared equals a, x equals plus or minus square root of a. This is a formula you need to remember. Don't forget plus or minus. So for a, first of all, you need to isolating this tangent. I add 2 both sides. So got the 6 tangent square x equals 6. Isolate tangent square x. Therefore, we divide by 6 both sides. We got the tangent square x equals 1. Square root both sides. Don't forget plus or minus. Therefore, I got the tangent x equals to plus or minus 1. Since we got the single trig equals constant number, reference angle, that's pi over 4. We go to this diagram. Since plus or minus 1, which means tangent is positive and also negative. That means all quadrants. Pi over 4 is reference angle. For second quadrant, that's 3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and 7 pi over 4. Therefore, x equals pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and 7 pi over 4. This will be the solution. Let's go to B. For B, still is a power pattern, so you need to isolating this cosine square x. Therefore, first of all, you need to move positive 1 from right side to the left side. You got the 2 minus 1 equals 4 cosine square x. We got the 1 equals 4 cosine square x. Then we divide it by 4 both sides. You will get the cosine square x equals 1 over 4. Then square root both sides. Don't forget plus or minus. We got cosine x equals plus or minus 1 over 2. Since we got the single trig equals constant form, we go to reference angle. That's pi over 3. Since cosine x equals positive 1 over 2 and also negative 1 over 2, which means all quadrants for cosine x. Reference angle is pi over 3, so we got the 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3. Therefore, this will be the solution. X equals pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3.